So today we wanted to explore what consensus building or the practice of Sarbat Khalsa would look like for the entire Panth in a modern context. And the main motivation for us in presenting this is actually our witnessing of the November 2015 Sarbat Khalsa. Prior to that, it had been this institution that we had been aware of, sort of vaguely as a historical occurrence. And the November 2015 Sarbat Khalsa really made it real. We were deeply inspired and motivated by the potential of this meeting. However, we remain very concerned that the process continued to keep the least powerful in the Panth shut out of Panthic decision making. And so our goal with today's workshop is to inspire you to learn more about Sarbat Khalsa, to give you a brief introduction to it, and to offer some proposals for what it could look like on a global scale. So we really want to underscore that everything we're presenting is sort of our submission to the Panth for consideration, debate, to be discarded, to be utilized. That's sort of the approach that we're taking with today's webinar. We just want to say a quick thank you to Santbir Singh from Free Akal Takht, and also most especially to Charanpreet Singh from Sarbat Khalsa USA. And we're going to be giving some links at the end of the presentation for those of you who would like more information about Sarbat Khalsa, more of the historical information. If you're interested in more of those kind of details, they both have provided a lot of support to us in developing this webinar. So I'm just going to start with the outline to give you all a sense of where we're going with this. So we're going to first just talk about why there's a need to revive Sarbat Khalsa, why we feel there's a need to revive, what guiding principles from Gurbani, from history, should shape a Sarbat Khalsa. We're also going to take a look at defining it, what it would look like in practice on a small scale, and then also looking at some proposals for how we could expand it effectively for 30 million. We want to explore how we could ensure, or maybe just ask some questions about ensuring equal access and voice. We certainly don't have the solution for that, but it's something I think that needs to be explored. Share some final thoughts and resources, and then we really look forward to having a discussion with all of you.
Okay. So why is it important to revive the tradition of Sarbat Khalsa? As a female Sikh who was born and lives in the diaspora, I've always felt disconnected from any decision making that takes place in the Panth. And it's not that I don't love or care about Sikhi, but moreover, it feels like our Sikh institutions don't care about me and my voice. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. But perhaps what is more concerning is that I imagine, and this is my imagination here, the vast majority of Sikhs, especially those who are disenfranchised, don't even know that it is their right to be part of the process. And for those that do know that it is our right, the apathy they feel is alarming, and the notion that nothing can or will change. Having said that, I'm sure, as Baghael Kaur pointed out, that none of us could have predicted that Sarbat Khalsa would take place, and Sangat came in droves despite the odds. People were reporting on the ground, using their cell phones, uploading onto social media. People really took notice, they really engaged, and despite its shortcomings, it was inspiring, especially given that the last Sarbat Khalsa took place in 1986. We also know that we have many issues in the Panth which need to be addressed, and in order for them to be addressed fully, they require a collaborative and united response.
I think to continue on from Rupinder Kaur's points, one of the most compelling, most important reason why we need to be practicing Sarbat Khalsa or practicing collective decision-making across the Panth is because this is a gift that Guru Sahib has given to us. It's a gift like Simran, like Wat, Gurbani, like the concept of Seva. All of these are gifts, and I think in the community, we've been a lot exploring and opening the gifts of Simran, of Wat, and especially in passing these gifts onto our children. But we haven't fully explored what it would look like for us all to have a voice in the direction of the Panth. And we certainly don't share that concept with our own children because we haven't developed that within our own selves. So I think the most compelling reason for me is Guru Sahib, and it's also another means, in addition to Gurmat, to experience Guru Sahib's hukam in our life, both on a personal level, but also on a nation level. So when we make decisions as a Panth through the guidance of Gurbani and from a place of humility and a genuine commitment to the process, those decisions that emerge from that process are in fact the Guru's words. It's another way for us to hear Guru Sahib's voice. So we're missing that way of experiencing Guru Sahib's voice, and I think that that's also an important thing that is waiting to be recovered. In addition, we have a duty to uphold the needs of a nation. So in addition to our own personal spiritual journeys and also the spiritual journeys of our family and of our community, we also have a duty to benefit others and also to contribute to the well-being of the Panth. So this is a quote that I really think highlights this important point. And I'll just read it here for you. It was reserved for Nanak to perceive the true principles of reform and to lay those foundations which enabled his successor Gobind to fire the minds with a new nationality and to give practical effect to the doctrine that the lowest is equal with the highest, in race as in creed, in political rights as in religious hopes, and most importantly here, it is the glory of Sikh history that the Gurus had in mind the duties of a nation as much as the duties of an individual. So really an important component of Sikhi is that we don't have these concepts like equality or freedom or sovereignty that exist merely as intellectual or even spiritual concepts. These are concepts that we are encouraged to enact in our day-to-day lives, and Sarbat Khalsa provides a means for us to enact that on a nation level.
Okay, so what guiding principles should shape a Sarbat Khalsa? First and foremost, our guiding principle for anything that we do as Sikhs is to ensure it is Gurmat inspired. We know from our everyday practices that we often invoke our Guru's wisdom and blessing to ensure our work is done successfully. For example, even before we have an Anand Garage, we often sing the beautiful Shabd, Gita Loriye Kam, So Har Pe Aakhiye, Garaj De Savar, Satgur Sach Sakhiye. So to move forward together collectively, we need to ensure that our processes, our frameworks, and any documents that we create and engage with through the Sarbat Khalsa process are aligned with Gurmat principles derived from scripture, history, and lifestyle. So it is worth reflecting why Ik Onkar is the first Shabad we read in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Note also that Ik is written in a numerical form, and as with everything, this was a conscious and deliberate action by Guru Sahib to draw attention to the importance of one Akal, one creator, and for you Star Wars buffs out there in a galaxy far, far away, one force. Its creation united in this oneness. In Veras, we read Rangi Rangi Parti, Karka Jinsi Maya Jinapai. He created the world with its various colors, species of beings, and variety of Maya. So do we practice oneness in our everyday interactions? What would a gathering of 30 million look like if we all embodied this concept of oneness? Do we currently live in a classless, casteless society of equals? These are important and tough questions to ask. And this leads to our second guiding principle. And bear in mind, this is not a definitive list, but more so a musing of a novice. Guru Nanak Sahib engaged with people of low castes, untouchables, people who in this day and age we may even hesitate to interact with. It is again not by accident that those considered as the lowest of the low in society, their words, their Bani was compiled in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, giving them the highest honor and highlighting their divinity, irrespective of caste. There is no exclusion, but open arms approach, bringing people together, such as Peer Mia Mir, who was a Sufi Muslim saint from Lahore, to lay the foundational stone for Darbar Sahib. Do we respect diversity in our Panth today, or are we afraid and suspicious of our differences? From my own experience, I can unfortunately cite many examples where we have become intolerant, and this is not the way of the Sikh. What is even more damaging is our lack of trust in one another, and even when something good is happening, we're very quick to point fingers and criticize. So what would it mean to practice Ikongar in the Sarbat Khalsa process? If we are connected by oneness, if all our voices are of equal value, then should there be any exclusion from the collective decision-making process? Which leads to this idea of shared leadership. And once we understand that our voices are of equal value, the decision-making by its very nature becomes a shared task, placing responsibility on each individual rather than electing officials by majority rule process. My mum used to say that, you know, you've been taught from right and wrong, and because you've been given this knowledge, then the onus is on you. If you make a decision, then it's your responsibility. The actions, the consequences of your actions, whether good or bad, are on you. And I think that, as Baghael Kaur indicated, that we have been given these amazing gifts, and so we do know. And what are we doing with those gifts is the question. So what if we have 30 million Sikhs with equal voice who come together to make decisions, but for whom and for what purpose? We know from our Guru history that Guru Nanak Sahib and the subsequent Guru Sahibs were action-orientated. They destroyed institutionalized hierarchies, they built alternative social, political, religious structures, and a simple belief in oneness was simply not enough. Gurus instructed us to take this powerful, game-changing, space-shifting idea of oneness and transform society to a place where human rights are universally protected and valued. And just on a side note, the UN Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed in 1948. So as you can see, Gurus were way ahead of the game. So how do we take on what appears to be an impossible task? We recognize that our sovereignty and the power we get when we are connected with the divine through Naam, that we're connected, so we have a huge, we're sovereign and we have this power. So what do we do with that? Remember that with power comes great responsibility, and the markers of sovereignty that we have been gifted to us are reminders of that responsibility. In today's political climate, we know that we often align ourselves with specific parties and individuals, some of whom may be just and others not so much. And but what we know is that we only bow our allegiance to the Akal, and that we answer to no one but Akal and no ruling party. And imagine that if you are in this system, it's difficult to go against the system if you're a part of it. So how do we do this difficult work if we don't trust one another? So being truthful, taking on the idea of honesty, Ikonkar, Satnam, how to embody honesty and truthfulness in the work that we do. How do we put aside our ideological differences? How do we honor our differences and come together for Sarbat Tapala? We pray for this every day in our ardas, but do we practice it? Do we accept Guru's Pana? And this is just a quote from John Malcolm in the sketch of the Sikhs. And he talks about this idea that when the chiefs and the principal leaders meet upon the solemn occasion of Sarbat Khalsa, it was concluded that all private animosities cease and every man sacrifices his personal feelings at the shrine of the general good. I'd like to pass on to Baghael Kaur for part 4, which is defining Sarbat Khalsa.
Okay. Now that we've laid down some of the groundwork of what guiding principles should be guiding our work in Sarbat Khalsa, we're going to take a look at the nitty-gritty, a bit more of the nitty-gritty. So the first concept that's really important for us in understanding Sarbat Khalsa is the idea of Gurmat. And as this quote, I think, is a beautiful, articulate way of explaining the relationship of Gurmat with Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Khalsa is the body of the Guru, and the Bani, Guru Granth Sahib Ji, is his soul. The Panth, conducting its spiritual and temporal affairs in the spirit of the Bani, also assumes the form of the Guru. Independent of the Bani, however, the Khalsa is not entitled to this status. The Khalsa is the means, therefore, through which Bani, or the will of Guru Sahib, takes form in the world. This transfiguration also happens on a personal level when we practice Seva, Simran, Bhat, but it also has a corporal component in our engagement with the Panth as a whole. And the institution for manifesting that engagement is Sarbat Khalsa, self-governance through collective decision-making. Principal Teja Singh also elaborates on this point further by explaining that the Sikh assembly, so the Sangat, actually has a great sanctity owing to the belief that the spirit of Guru Sahib lived and moved among them. They began to assume higher and higher authority until collectively the whole body, called the Panth, came to be regarded as an embodiment of the Guru. So what all of this is pointing to is that collective decision-making through Sarbat Khalsa for Sikhs is actually, in fact, a powerful tool for social change. It's a means for achieving an integrated self. And when I say that, I mean there can be a way for us to actually practice collective decision-making within our own selves, not only in our communities, not only within the Panth, but if we imagine within our own psyches, integrating and honoring each component of ourselves and coming to consensus with all of these pieces of ourselves in any decision that we make in our life. So it really has a personal component that can go outwards into the community and further. I think we've become very accustomed in our lives to majority rules or authoritarian structures, and that sort of is our norm. It can feel like the comfort zone. So when we're talking about collective decision making, there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of fear. And so when we get to really laying out the process in a few slides, I hope to dispel some of those fears about what it might mean to really open up a decision-making process to a truly democratic process. I think the most fundamental and important point about consensus decision-making is that because it was a gift from Guru Sahib and because it honors the oneness of all, it really is the most authentic means for truly honoring and living the concept of Sangat. So we reject majority rules, not because we prefer one system over another system. We reject it because it basically is a dismissal of the divine within each individual. If we're not taking into consideration the beliefs, understandings, preferences of all people, then we're not really practicing the concept of Ikonkar. So that's why Sarbat Khalsa is so fundamental. It's not, maybe we should do majority rules, maybe we should do Robert's rules, maybe we should do a parliamentary system. No, these are fine for other peoples at other times. Sarbat Khalsa was given to us because it is the Sikh way of practicing decision making. So we can understand Sarbat Khalsa to be threefold. It's a method for engaging with each other and the greater Panth, which seeks to address the inequality that exists between people. It's also an institution that formalizes our decision making. And it's also the literal gathering of the Panth that would occur on a semi-regular basis in the past and hopefully in the future. So as we begin to examine the political and communal structures that Guru Sahib developed through time, some very powerful benefits begin to become clear. So not only is Sarbat Khalsa manifesting the principles that we are supposed to live as Sikhs, it's also conferring many benefits. So we see here, when we're looking at the missile system, for example, this wonderful institution gave each individual a personal share in the government and thus placed within reach of every Sikh the attainment of rank and influence. So in this way, when we practice collective decision making, we empower each individual. In addition, the band system, which was the precursor to the missile system, this also provided a forum for leadership skills to develop in individuals as well. So when you practice collective decision making, instead of having one person who's making the decision or even majority, people actually increase their capacity to be leaders within the community. So one of the concerns that often is coming out, we don't have positive leadership, we don't have people in the community who have developed those skills to help guide each other to develop their own leadership skills. And the way we develop leadership is we don't wait for a leader to be bestowed upon us. We empower each individual to develop those skills on their own. And most importantly, it collectivizes power instead of concentrating it in the hands of a few. And we've already seen in the month a lot of the negative results of power getting concentrated in the hands of a few at the expense of others. So let's take a look at what it would mean to practice Sarbat Khalsa. So if you've ever heard of the concept of consensus before now, or you've had the great opportunity to practice it, you would likely be aware that although it's a very principled way of making decisions and it can be very rewarding, it is by no means easy, and it does require ardent, constant effort and dedication, and the development of specific skills. So if we imagine, all of a sudden, as a Panth diving into Sarbat Khalsa right now, I think we would have, except by Guru's grace, a bit of a catastrophe, because we're not used to making decisions that way. It's not sort of this free-flowing thing that anybody can start doing it at any moment, because we just don't have the experience practicing consensus in a formal way. So it really will require some training, some development, and a lot of the proposals that we're going to be offering here, the timeline is not next year or even the year after. We're sort of looking at, in 5 to 10 years, we're hopeful that a true Sarbat Khalsa that integrates the knowledge and wisdom of every individual in the Panth can occur. So this is a bit more of a long-term, medium, long-term vision. So let's take a look at what the basic consensus process is. And again, this is a form that's often practiced in small groups of people who are working on campaigns. And this is by no means the only way to practice consensus, but this is one framework that maybe we can build upon to understand how Sarbat Khalsa might look for the Panth. So for those of us who are used to majority rule, often there will be a chairperson or even a facilitator. They'll present the decision that needs to be made. They'll listen to everybody in the group, and then that person will ultimately make a decision on behalf of the group. So consensus looks a bit different. The facilitator plays a different role. They're not in a decision-making role. They're just there simply to draw out the input and to synthesize the input from the group into a resolution. If a facilitator is doing their job well, they should be speaking the least in the process, as opposed to maybe a chairperson where we're used to them speaking the most. So if they're doing the job well, they're facilitating everybody else's voice. So a resolution or an issue that needs a decision to be made on is presented by the facilitator or another member of the group. And then open discussion occurs about possible components of a resolution. It's really important at this stage that all discussion is geared towards developing a resolution. I think we've all been in meetings that have gone far too long, and frustration increases because the contribution that is occurring has to do with maybe a random story about this person's life, which can still be very interesting and important for after the meeting. But unless the sentence that you're speaking in a meeting directly relates to the development of a resolution, then it should not be said, unless, of course, you're dealing with oppressive behavior or there's an emotional need for something to be expressed. But outside of those two reasons, all discussion should be geared towards developing a resolution. The facilitator then synthesizes the feedback that's given into preliminary resolutions. Amendments, additions, new directions are proposed by the group, and the resolution gets further and further refined and articulated by the facilitator, integrating all of the feedback that they're given by everybody in the group. The facilitator's job is also to ensure that participation is broad, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to participate, but anyone who wants to participate should be given that space. So when the feedback seems to be exhausted, the facilitator then presents the resulting resolution back to the group. And when they sense that we're very close to getting consensus, they do something called testing for consensus. So that's our final step here. So the difference with consensus versus majority rule is that you have much more than yes or no as a possible response to a resolution that's being presented to you. So each person at that meeting will then be given the opportunity to say what their response to the resolution is. And these are the options they have. So the first is to agree, and they totally endorse the resolution. They're behind it 100%. They may even likely be involved in implementing the resolution if necessary. The second option is a pass. And this is somebody who maybe is not affected by the resolution. They're completely neutral about the resolution. So they don't have a feeling either way. The next option is a stand aside, and this is a really important option. This would be for somebody who doesn't 100% agree with the option that's being made, but they don't have any fundamental moral concerns about the option, and they are willing to allow the group to go ahead with it because they feel that it may be the best resolution at this time. And the final option is a block, and this is that somebody so strongly, so fundamentally and morally disagrees with the resolution that they're going to prevent the group from going ahead. I'm just going to check on some background noise. Give me one moment.
It looks like Baghael Kaur has gone offline, so we'll just give her a minute. Thank you for your patience.
So sorry about that delay, everybody. Technical difficulties. So we were just looking at the final response that someone can have to a resolution, and that is the block. And this is really what distinguishes consensus decision-making from majority rule. So majority rule, if you have 99% of people on board, that would actually be considered an excellent resolution. That would be a great buy-in for that resolution. But in consensus, and this is what makes it so different and powerful, is you can have one person out of 30 million not agree with that resolution, and it can't go forward. That sounds like a really scary proposition when you have a community, any community that's as diverse as our community. But what's important about that is that the concerns of that person, the process doesn't just stop there. Those concerns then get reintegrated into the resolution, so that it actually becomes a much more creative resolution than it would have been otherwise, and can take new than wouldn't have been foreseen by the group. So if a block does occur, it's very important that that block can be explained. We'll just go back here. And that the reason for the block is explained, because only then can that content be reintegrated into a resolution. So the facilitator may start the discussion again. It may be necessary for the group to get more information to move forward. If however, the decision still remains blocked, then it remains blocked. And that's sort of the power and the challenge of consensus decision making. For Sarbat Khalsa, the resolutions that come out of this kind of process have quite the sanctity, quite the weight. So if we're going to define what a Gurmatta is, that's literally a decree of the Guru. So this is a resolution that comes out of this process that has been approved by the Sangat. So often historically there would be representatives of jatas or bands or missals, and those representatives would draft a resolution. They would then present those resolutions to the Sangat for approval, and only then, if they had gained approval, would it be considered a Gurmatta. And this would, it would be considered a great sacrilege for those resolutions to be contravened. So let's take a look at what this model might mean for 30 million Sikhs. So although we have historical records of the occurrence of Sarbat Khalsas in the past, including the resolutions often which were passed, we do not actually have the procedures which were followed. They're not pre-articulated for us. So this is really where we're in new territory as a Panth. We can look at guiding principles in Gurbani, in history. We can get clues based on the resolutions that occurred in previous Sarbat Khalsas. But basically, we are left to develop and implement the procedures as best we can in order to carry out consensus. So these are some starting points based on what we do know historically, and then we're going to look at some proposals for how that procedure can be fleshed out. So often Sarbat Khalsa would take place twice a year, except for emergency situations. So that's something that we can be looking at too, having regular Sarbat Khalsas twice a year, either at these dates or at alternative dates, according to the will of the Panth. It would always take place in the presence of Guru Sahib Ji and would commence after Ardas, receiving of Hukam, distribution of Kara Prasad. Often representatives of or jatas or bands would deliberate on an issue, construct resolutions, which were then shared with the larger Sangat for approval. And the resolutions, when we actually look at the resolutions that came out of these Sarbat Khalsas historically, they did not deal with doctrinal issues. So they didn't deal with how long Areras Sahib should be done, or other doctrinal issues, but they primarily addressed pressing political concerns which impacted everyone in the Panth to some degree. So at that time and now as well, the Panth was literally fighting for its life, and it was only through coming together with a united front that they survived. So really, these issues were life and death issues. And I would also like to add, it wasn't just for the benefit of the Panth. Many of the resolutions which were passed had to do with rescuing other people, with interfering with political regimes that were oppressive, that were impacting other people too. So it really had to do with service in the world as well. So some of the proposals that we've come up with is as you can see here on the screen. So although we use consensus unconsciously in many of our interactions with others, we do require some training. So one proposal would be that in order for someone to participate in a Sarbat Khalsa, they would need to undergo some sort of training process to acquaint them with the process, the structure, and also to help them to cultivate some of the skills and mind frame to participate in a Sarbat Khalsa effectively. It would also be necessary for us to register to do a census of all the Sikhs globally. And this is where the Akal Takht could come in and play an administrative role of providing that registration process for all Sikhs. Due to the size of the Panth, there would need to be some level of representative consensus occurring. However, this would need to be done in a way that would still be responsive to every individual Sikh. And this is just one option of how people could get representatives at a Sarbat Khalsa. So one would be, many of us already belong to Jathas, so there may be a natural structure that already exists where we would feel comfortable with someone from our Jatha representing us. There may be many of us who don't belong to a Jatha who have alliances with other Sikhs that, and those alliances are based more on political or philosophical perspectives as opposed to religious perspectives. So for someone like that, we know in order to through Manji, and that would be based simply on where our geographic. Every individual has a right to representation that authentically reflects their perspective, and all of these represent to be accountable to the group that they're representing and should be able to be recalled at any time if that group doesn't feel like they're representing them accurately, authentically. So ideally, the agenda for upcoming Sarbat Khalsa, if we did do a Sarbat Khalsa twice a year, we would have 6 months to prepare for the next one, to get the feedback from our groups, and develop our sense of where we would want our representative to stand on the resolutions that would be coming up. So by having that kind of lead time, ideally, we would develop the agenda for the next Sarbat Khalsa at the preceding one. In addition, all attendees would have to publicly proclaim their commitment to the guiding principles as found in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, in addition to proclaiming their commitment to the betterment of the Panth as a whole, while renouncing personal, tribal, or political alliances, while keeping in mind that during the process, a common minimum is being pursued. All proposals must be in according to the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. There must be no distinction of age, gender, or any other sort of discrimination through the process, and no hidden or ulterior agendas. There are a lot of other questions and that need to be addressed when we're thinking about expanding this to a global level. Where would it take place? How would we utilize technology for reaching consensus? These are all still open for discussion, and a lot of the folks at Free Akal Takht are trying to work this out. And if you're interested in participating in what that might look like, I really encourage you to check out their website. We'll be giving that at the end of the presentation. Of course, the most open question about all of this is how do we ensure equal access and voice for all Sikhs in this process, and that's what Rupinder Kaur is going to present now.
So we understand the importance of ensuring equal access and voice, given the shared oneness that we have, given that we're all sovereign, given that this is part of our heritage, it's our gift from our Guru. Unfortunately, there are many threats to our nation being sovereign. As we know, the power is concentrated in elites. There's no space or little space for diverse opinions. There's a lack of consensus based decision making. There are outside forces. And again, these are no excuses, but certainly this is what is happening on the ground as we speak. There's no accountability or openness in the system. And we're very much focused on individual personalities. There's no formalized capacity building in the Panth, as Baghael Kaur had sort of suggested that there is a need for some training here to really develop our skills in building consensus and coming to decisions that are perhaps quite difficult. And individuals, and more importantly, individuals and groups of people are excluded from Panthic decision making, including, and this is not limited to children, and we know that children our gurus were children as well. So, and Jai Sahibja, they played such an integral role, and so children should be part of this process. If anything, to learn what it means to be part of the process. So children, women, especially in remote areas, if we sort of think about 80% of our population is in the Punjab, we have women in the Punjab who are not educated, are not given those same opportunities, and they may not have access to Facebook, to the internet, in a way that perhaps a woman living in the diaspora may. Non-Punjabis are often excluded, and caste-based discrimination, which is not meant to exist according to the Guru's teachings, but still does. So how can we learn to be sovereign? I think first and foremost is engaging in Gurbani and developing our own relationship, recognizing that we have this personal responsibility, this ownership, that Sarbat Khalsa and the process of Sarbat Khalsa belongs to us. And we can allow Gurbani to inspire us to take action. We think about shabads like Heere jaisa janam hai kaudi badle jaye. Why are we wasting this diamond, this treasure of a janam that we have been granted? Other shabds like bahut janam bichre te mado e janam tumhare likhe. Can we take on this power that we have been given? Can we own this power that we have been given and use this power for social change and for justice? Recently, I was listening to another webinar, and Santbir Singh talked about this idea that our house is burning down, but we're busy arranging the furniture. So the question does remain: how do we engage 30 million Sikhs? So we can build capacity by training our children, have them involved in that process in the way that we've allowed them to learn what it means to do Simran, what it means to do Seva. Let them experience, let them be at that table. Perhaps they're not making those decisions necessarily, but let them be part of the process so they can learn from a very young age. It becomes part of their development. How can we then, as individuals, as adults, practice engaging in our local communities? Can we have training sessions? Can we have webinars such as these? How do we find creative solutions to engage Sikhs? We don't have the answers here, but we can certainly come together and leverage on each other's expertise and find ways to engage those that are traditionally disenfranchised. Those individuals, like I said before, that don't have access to technology or print media, or aren't able to find the space to be able to have their voice heard. And then talking about space, I think it is important for those that have that power and privilege to create safe spaces for women especially, and for children to engage freely without restrictions. And some of those can be very logistical in nature. So if you look at the pictures from the Sarbat Khalsa that happened in November 2015, we can see that you certainly see a vast majority of young and old men at that gathering. But one wonders that if I'm a young woman or a young mother and I have a child or children that I'm looking after, are there spaces there for me to be able to be part of the flow, fulfill the duties as a mother or even as a father, if I have my child? So those are questions, those are just one example, but those are questions that we really need to ponder and consider and come up with some solutions. And then I talked about this idea, and I would love to in another presentation to go into more, but being aware of our own power and privilege and how this impacts how much space we take up in decision-making spaces. Often when you sort of engage in certain conferences, what have you, in the Sikh Panth, it's usually the individual that speaks the loudest that people are listening to, and there's often not enough space given for dialogue and healthy discussion. So we come to sort of final thoughts here. And remember that we're meant to inspire to be like-minded individuals that are divinely connected, who are in the pursuit of truth. So the question that I have is, what should the mindset be of an individual who takes part in this process? Are we able to reflect upon our own intentions and actions? I work as a psychotherapist, and if I don't know my own mind, how do I expect to understand anyone else's? And we're so blessed to have Gurbani as a rich treasure that allows us to understand ourselves and others. To quote from a children's movie that I went to watch last night, and I'm sure you're snickering here, but if Baghael Kaur was to publicize or publish a recommended movies list, I think the movie Zootopia would make the cut. And in this quote, it sort of says, change starts with you, with me, and with all of us. And if we try to understand each other, the more exceptional we will be. And I think in order for us to become that exceptional, we do need to make a commitment to our individual development. How do we cultivate the attributes of Vaheguru? And we get this message right at the beginning of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Ek Omkar, Satnam, Karta Purkh, Nirbhav, Nirvair, Akal Murat, Ajuni Sabang, Gurprasad. So this belief in oneness, being truthful, being creative, imagining new possibilities, being fearless, but being without hate, being consistent, being sovereign, and being graceful. And when we think about our Guru Sahibs as well, they exhibited many, many characteristics, and to name a few: humility, submission, equality, clarity, composure, courage, compassion, self-sacrifice, service, justice, sovereign. Are these attributes that we are cultivating currently in our daily lives? When we think of the example of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, and he sat on the Tati Tavi, and what were the words that came out of their mouth was "Tera pana meetha lage," that, you know, whatever you say, your hukam, I accept your hukam, and it's sweet to me. And so those become incredibly powerful words that we can use as inspiration to allow us to move forward despite the difficulties that we have in the Panth, despite the challenges that we have, despite the distrust and just the apathy that is currently plaguing our nation. And I think that with the Guru's blessing, anything is possible. So we have to have faith, we have to have trust. And it's that deep connection to Gurbani that allows us to aspire to live a Guru-orientated life. And these goals are achievable. And we know the Panth freed South Asia from the British in 33 years. The Panth freed Punjab from Mughal and Afghani rule in 3 generations. A free Akal Takht is with Guru Har Gobind Singh Guru Har Gobind Sahib's blessings a reality that can be achieved? And just to finish off before I pass on to Baghael Kaur, I just want to share today's Hukamnama, which talks about, it's by Guru Arjan Dev Ji on Ang 713, and Guru Sahib talks about Satguru Ayo Saran Tuhari, that, oh true Guru, I have come into your saran, into your sanctuary. Mile Sukh Naam Har Soba Chinta Lai Hamari, that grant me the peace and the glory of your name and remove all my anxieties. So our responsibility and our role is for action, is Guru inspired action, and we leave the rest to our Guru.
I wanted to end with some resources, but before we finally end, I just want to make a brief comment. The understanding that this seems insurmountable, impossible, not likely, that's the nature of Sikh history. It was always insurmountable. It was always not likely, and we persevered through Guru's grace. So remaining in that state of Chardi Kala, that eternal optimism is a requirement of us as well. That is the mind frame that we are supposed to maintain against all odds. And I think it is with that frame of mind that we will be successful by Guru's grace. So we just wanted to leave with a few resources, and we really look forward to the discussion to follow. Of course, you can check out Free Akal Takht. There's some folks there, and they're working on sort of developing these procedures, developing a framework, coming up with ideas of what steps need to be taken for us to actually start practicing Sarbat Khalsa on a large scale. There's amazing resources at Sarbat Khalsa USA. That's also where you can get in touch with Chanpreet Singh, and he is an amazing resource on, he's basically read everything that's available on Sarbat Khalsa historically, and he's also working with Santvir Singh from Free Akal Takht to put together an annotated bibliography, and that's also going to be showing up on Free Akal Takht. So if you want to do more reading on your own and explore this, then please keep checking in with that. He's also part of the Revive Sarbat Khalsa page on Facebook, which has more information. And then there's quite a few presentations on Sikh Research Institute's website, both on the history of Sarbat Khalsa and also one on consensus decision making, if you wanted to explore both of those further.
All right, so now we can start with the Q&A. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask your question, please let me know in the question box that you have a mic, and also state which city you are from. I'm just going to start off with a couple of the statements that were made. Prabjot Singh says we should hold mock Sarbat Khalsas in a build-up to the one that will be in 10 to 15 years. Do you want to comment on that, Rupinder Kaur, Baghael Kaur?
I'll just say something quickly. I think there is no time like the present. Let's start putting into practice these procedures on a local level immediately. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you look at Guru history, so Guru Sahib over a 240-year period, give or take, developed the community. They provided us with the tools, and so I think it's worth remembering that revolutions don't happen overnight. But nonetheless, we've got an amazing treasure trove of foundational pieces in terms of our Gurbani, our history, the institution of Sarbat Khalsa, the institution of Akal Takht. So we're sort of ahead of the game here in that respect. It's more about how do we start adopting and living this lifestyle.
Okay, so the next statement is by Prabdev Singh. This webinar has been really good so far. It, however, doesn't take into consideration how leadership in Punjab is not accustomed to such decision making.
I think that's why this movement needs to happen on the grassroots level. And when we don't, it has to be structured in such a way that it doesn't require the buy-in of politicians to agree with it or not agree with it. So if we start on a grassroots level, we start implementing this decision making, for example, in our gurdwaras, in our community organizations, we start building that capacity, we start taking power away from those politicians because we start making those decisions on a community level that aren't being made by us right now to deal with the issues in the Panth, to deal with corruption, to deal with drug addiction and other issues. I think that's a really important question, and I think we do need to structure things in such a way that, because they're not going to buy in. This is fundamentally a challenge to their power and to their authoritarian rule in many situations, and to their corruption in many examples. So we need to do it in such a way that we take the power for ourselves without requiring their participation.
Prabhjot Singh is suggesting that we should look at case studies of the World Jewish Congress. I don't know if you would like to elaborate on that, Prabhjot Singh. I'm just going to unmute you for a second so you can speak.
I think we should look at the World Jewish Congress because looking at what the Jewish people went through, I think we have a lot of similarities as them, and as you can see, the Jewish community has become very successful in the international community, and they also, before the build up to where they are now, they held these World Jewish Congress where Jewish members from all over the world convened, sort of what we're trying to do, and there's a lot of case studies out there, and we should look at their history as well to see what we could find that will be beneficial to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right in that. And if we take from Guru history again, Guru Nanak Sahib traveled all over Asia. Some say even as far as Italy. I think that there was something that someone had found there, perhaps. But Guru Sahib. So I think that Guru Sahib certainly traveled in order to draw from other communities, other ways of doing things. And if you sort of think about even how Guru Granth Sahib Ji is compiled, so I think that there's definitely a case to be made to look outside to see what best practices could we use in order to kind of move forward together collectively. I think a caveat to that too, though, however, is that in Sikh history and post-Guru period, when we have taken on other ways of governance, so primarily if we've taken on the British system, or if we've taken on kind of a monarchy during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, those have not always worked that well for us. So I think it is important to sort of balance between the two and sort of say, how do we kind of go to our indigenous ways of doing things that have been given to us as gifts from Guru Sahib, and they certainly tried and tested many things throughout with respect to the Manji system and what have you, and Masans, and there's a lot of history there that I'm not too clear on, but I certainly think that Guru Sahib over that 240-year period certainly tried and tested many things, and sort of came and gave us the Khalsa and allowed us to self-determine kind of our destiny, so to speak. But I totally agree with you. I think drawing from outside resources is going to be part of our strength. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to unmute Harmeet Singh, who would like to ask his question or make his statement.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. All right. So really enjoyed the presentation. I think you raised some very important points. But my main concerns are that, there are some limitations to this process, which I believe the presentation is not looking at. See, back in the day, in the historical period, the consensus building, or the Sarbat Khalsa way of consensus building, was possible because Sikhs were not in big numbers in terms of population. This methodology works when we have a common goal and we just need a resolution to just tactically understand how to achieve certain goal. But we need to have some sort of common goal, and we are trying to put a planning process towards that goal. But realistically speaking, I'm afraid that our demographics have changed. We're not a couple of thousand people, we're millions, you know, and my concern is that someone raised about the World Jewish Congress, and the reason why they are successful is because they have a legitimate representation. We need something of a representative democracy, where we can have, you know, leaders or legitimate representatives who can represent us. We don't have any model. The world will not recognize us if we don't have legitimate representation. The reason World Jewish Congress is successful is because in the eyes of the world, there are legitimate representatives. And who are legitimate representatives? Those people who are elected by the masses. Others who are not elected by the masses are not considered legitimate representatives realistically speaking, by this world. So my concern is, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel when we already know what's going to work on a mass scale, what's going to work on a small scale? I agree with this consensus building process, but this has limitations in itself to be workable on a really large scale. So we got to come up with a system, and we already have systems that are in place, you know, to adapt so that we can have legitimate representation in front of the world and be recognized for that.
Okay, so I just want to start by saying the concerns that you're articulating, the scale, the issue of scale, the issue of legitimacy, the issue of representation, these are all very real issues that do need to be tackled. I think it's doable, but I think you're right to be concerned about those issues. I do want to push back a little bit just on the point, we know what's working for, or we imagine we know what's working for the Jewish community. That's not necessarily what's going to work for Sikhs. We know and it's not necessarily what's going to work for all Sikhs either. So I agree with you, because of the scale of the community, there will need to be some degree of representation. It's just, it doesn't seem feasible for all 30 million Sikhs all at once to come to consensus on a resolution. So there has to be some degree of representation. That being said, I really have a deep faith that what the institutions Guru Sahib left for us are eternal institutions. These weren't done by accident, and these weren't time-limited institutions either. I've experienced consensus with thousands of people at actions in Canada where there have been majority of people agreed with the resolution, for example, and there was one person who disagreed, and we integrated the concerns of that one person, and we came up with a creative resolution that satisfied everybody, and it was a really powerful process. So because I have that direct experience, I really do have faith that we can find a way to make this work. I think we also need to ask the question, why are we more concerned about being recognized by others outside of the community as being legitimate, and less concerned about how to give voice to 30 million Sikhs? I think that needs to be the priority. And the final point is how we select our representatives. That can be decided by every collective body. So if we imagine we have a jata of several hundred people, and they themselves can decide how they select a representative who's going to go to Sarbat Khalsa. We don't need to get involved in the nitty-gritty of every single group's autonomy. So there is going to be a certain level of autonomy that will need to be granted, because Sikhs do live in a global context now. They come from so many different cultures. They have so many different needs. They have different ways of relating to each other. So there has to be diversity in the way that representation happens. But I think the fundamental principle that we are going to give voice and to all Sikhs, I think needs to be maintained, because that's what distinguishes Sarbat Khalsa from the other systems.
Yeah, and I would just love to add is that this idea that Sikhs are across the world is just a wonderful opportunity for us to come together, and we're living in such an exciting time in the sense that we're having this webinar right now, you know, online. It's wonderful. I'm sitting in the comfort of my home in some comfy PJs, you know, presenting this webinar. So I think that we certainly have this amazing opportunity to leverage on each other's expertise and learn from each other, as well as sort of finding ways, creative ways of coming together.
Harmeet Singh is just asking to do a short, quick follow-up. So please speak, Harmeet Singh.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, well, thank you. You know, the reason why it's important for the others to recognize this thing is because if it's legitimate, because we don't live in a cocoon, you know, and we can't be irrational to ourselves by saying that, you know what, we're going to invest so much of energy, so much of effort in something that actually has no standards of recognizability from the rest of the world. I mean, if you're talking about World Jewish Congress, I mean, they are recognized as a legitimate body.
But let me just ask you quickly here, if we do select representatives according to whatever process those collective groups decide, and those representatives do go to a Sarbat Khalsa and make decisions and deliberate on the needs of the Panth, what about that process is not legitimate, or would not be legitimate in the eyes of somebody else?
Well, because I think this is not fully democratic, and then we're talking about establishing a theocracy then.
In what way would we, if we have representatives from every collective and everybody is participating in that process of selecting those representatives, how is that a theocracy?
Well, if there are no you have not elaborated how they're going to be representatives. So if they are chosen to be representatives through some legitimate form of process, then of course that's not theocracy. But
okay.
If they're not, then of course, then we are establishing. See, the problem with when you mention authoritarian systems, you know, and I agree with that point, that we have authoritarian way of things going on in our society also, where people are just like this Baba or that, and this Jatta, he has this leader. They're not democratically elected also. I mean, they're just a bunch of groupism going on in our people. They have no legitimate representation, have no system of debate and representation of different points of view that get vetted in front of all the Sikhs so that they can choose what's best for them. So as long as we have process of debate, discussion, and proper vetting so that people can go and elect which one is the best representative, that's democracy. But if some Jatha Banda or Jatha Bandi is gonna just put, hey, this is our great Baba, I mean, that's what they do, and you know that.
I'm just gonna cut you off for a moment. If you'd like to continue this discussion with Baghael Kaur and Rupinder Kaur, please be in touch with them. But there are other questions that we will need to address before.
And I'll just mention really quickly, the concerns that you're raising about representation are very, very legitimate and are of great concern. So I think, like, now that we've had a chance to talk a little bit more about it, I think that is exactly where we need help developing methodology. And so this is absolutely a crucial issue that needs to be looked at. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
I'm going to move on. Prabjot Singh asks, how will we represent ourselves in the international community? Will we establish a unit organization in the international system and have it integrated with organizations such as the United Nations? Would you like to?
Navneet, can you just repeat the last part of that question?
it's stating, will we establish a unit organization in the international system and have it integrated with organizations such as the United Nations?
I think that would be amazing. So I think these questions, these are all, we don't have the answers to this kind of question. I think the potential is enormous, and I think it would be amazing to be integrated into the United Nations in some way.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a great suggestion.
Yeah, and one thing that we, in this presentation, I think that we it wasn't within the scope of this presentation today, but we didn't sort of look at the Institute of Baghael Kaur in any great detail. And so I think that that is something that might be worth for Harmeet Singh, yourself, and Prabhjot to sort of look into. There is a wonderful presentation on Sikh Research Institute's YouTube channel that was done by Amrita Kaur and Santbir Singh, and they talk about the institution of Baghael Kaur. And I think that that might shed a little bit more light on this notion of what would we look like on the global, if we were sort of thinking about global representation, what would that look like, and how would we then build relationships with agencies such as United Nations. I sort of had made that joke about Baghael Kaur publishing a recommended movies list, but this idea that Baghael Kaur, the institution of Baghael Kaur, could be that organization, that institution that allows us to kind of come together globally. So I would refer you then, and I totally agree with Baghael Kaur that we would love to continue this dialogue, absolutely.
So Barinder Khalsa, Sat Sri Akal, is from Rockville, MD. I don't know where that is, I'm sorry. Question is that, how can we enroll almost all Sikhs, 30 million? And second question is, shouldn't we have only one Takht, Sri Akal Takht Sahib, like Vatican, as other four Takhts have not started by our gurus?
That's an interesting question. So if we think about how do we do a census of 30 million Sikhs, so we really need to start thinking on a country scale. Like, this is a nation, we need huge administrative, it would be a huge administrative undertaking to undertake something like that. And by restoring the Akal Takht's sovereignty and developing that institution, it would have the potential to be that administrative body to register all Sikhs. So that registration would be essential to ensure that all voices would be heard. I'm not so sure about the issue of integrating the other Takhts or not, so I'll leave that one.
So Paramjit Singh asks, the information age today allows for the voice of the millions to come together. I think the model presented will work and get the masses to participate. Sorry, it's more of a statement.
I totally agree. Yeah, faith in the Guru and in the Guru Panth.
Prabhjot Singh says Akal Takht is more for internal affairs. We need another organization for our external affairs. And there's a follow-up. Akal Takht is where the decisions will be made. The international organization is what will implement what needs to be implemented in the international community.
So I think that I might also refer Prabhjot to, if you take a look on the Free Akal Takht website, they do have a draft governance framework. And so they do talk about this idea of Akal Takht being our institution, but within that, you would have perhaps different departments or areas that would then work towards perhaps global affairs, or we could even, and as Sikhs, because in the absence of this collective decision-making process, we haven't been able to present our views and on things that are happening in the world, so such as the Syrian refugee crisis or climate change and what have you. So I do appreciate your comment, because I think that what you're highlighting is the need for us to be able to have an institution that allows us to make both internal decisions, but also allows us to engage with the international and global community.
I think a follow-up that Prabhjot Singh just sent is free course on what I'm talking about. Please share with everyone else. It is www.coursera.org. If you are looking at the questions box, it should be in there. If you don't see it, I'll copy and paste it in the chat box. Harpreet Singh from New York City asks or says, we have had bad actors infiltrating our processes throughout our history. How would we protect ourselves against this if one person can block the process?
This is where building affinity in those small collective groups is so essential. Infiltration is going to happen. It's already happened. It's in the community. It's a reality we have to deal with. If a person, the thing with the block is someone can't just block and be like, I block, and then, kind of walk away. They have to have a legitimate reason, and they have to be able to continue with the process to articulate why their block is, to help articulate how their concerns can be reintegrated into a new resolution that addresses their concerns. So I think there's going to be a certain amount of safeguard if they have to participate in the process that way. If someone wants to jeopardize the process, there's still going to be a lot of potential for that. So it is an open question how we're going to deal with infiltration, but infiltration would happen whether we were doing a majority rules or whether we were doing consensus or not. Consensus just requires that people explain themselves a lot more thoroughly, and it requires a lot more intimacy on the parts of the participants, which hopefully would lead to people being kind of figured out. So yeah, it is still an open question. It's not it definitely is not a perfect system, and it's not immune to corruption either, as majority rules is not immune.
We have time for one more question if anyone has. Otherwise, we will close the session. So if there are any more questions, please type quickly in the question box. I will take it that there are no more questions. So I would just like to say thank you to all of you for your questions, and my apologies if I did not get to answer any of your questions due to time constraints. You are more than welcome to ask us those questions on our Twitter handle or Facebook page, and we will be sure to post our answers. Please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free, but there is a cost associated with its technology and administration. If you feel you have benefited from this particular webinar or others in the past, please consider making a donation to Sikri or becoming a webinar sponsor. More details can be obtained in the follow-up email you will receive or by emailing info@sikri.org. A reminder, everyone, please wait a few seconds after for the link to appear on a follow-up survey. Your feedback is extremely important to Sikh Research Institute, and we appreciate your time. I'd like to now hand it back to Baghael Kaur and Rupinder Kaur to offer some closing comments.
I just want to thank everybody for engaging with us and for allowing us the space to share some of our thoughts and ideas. And I look forward to also potentially meeting a lot of you and carrying forward with this process. I think Sarbat Khalsa has the potential to transform the month really, really powerfully. But I think we also don't need to think about it as something far in the future that we're going to be doing on a global scale. I think we, as one of the commenters mentioned, this is something we can start practicing now in our communities, and whether it happens on that global level or not, we can start enjoying its benefits locally as we put it into practice. So thank you so much for coming on this journey with us.
Mm-hmm. And same, I would like to thank everybody for being here today. And I think was listening to a presentation by Sukha Singh last week in Rexdale, and he was saying that in my father's house there is room for everyone. And I think this idea, really sticking with this idea of oneness and using that as a guiding principle to move forward, both in our everyday daily lives at home, but also coming together as a month and ensuring that we leave a better panth for our future generations. So I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, and feel honored to be able to share our thoughts today. So thank you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
As I end the webinar, I want to encourage all of you to continue this discussion online with each other, with your families. And I'd like to thank the presenters and you, the audience, for this e-sangat today. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.